1990, Terry Schiavo suffered a severe case of cardiac arrest in her Florida home. She had developed a severe case of hypokalemia or potassium shortage, which destroyed most of her brain and left her in a permanent state of vegetation. In the following years, her husband Michael and her parents did everything they could to improve her condition. But after it was evident that Terry would remain in this hopeless state, Michael went to court asking to disconnect the tube that provided nutrition to her emotionless body. For the next 7 years, Schiavo's parents, who were staunch Roman Catholics, fought him bitterly in a battle that engaged the entire nation, including Governor Bush, President Bush, and the U.S. Congress, over how to decide treatment for terminal patients who are unable to communicate. After 15 years of bitter court cases and passionate protests from both sides, a state judge ordered caretakers to disconnect the feeding tube, ending Schiavo's 15-year struggle. Schiavo's story brought to light this issue of intervention in end-of-life situations, and whether or not living even at its worst is better than dying peacefully. And so today, euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide are becoming major issues as technology is prolonging lives that are often in vegetative and miserable conditions. So what exactly is euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide? Euthanasia is when the physician directly intervenes to end the patient's life, and there are two types of euthanasia. Passive euthanasia is foregoing medical treatment, knowing that nature's course is death. This is more often referred to as pulling the plug, as in the case of Terry Schiavo. The other type is active euthanasia, which is illegal almost everywhere, and that is hastening death through legal drugs. And then there's physician-assisted suicide, where the physician provides the patient with the ability to end their own life, and the patient does the rest. Generally, this means hooking up a machine that releases lethal drugs when the patient presses a button. Physician-assisted suicide would hardly be an issue if it wasn't for Jack Kevorkian. Kevorkian was one of the earliest and by far the most well-known advocates for physician-assisted suicide. After a career in pathology, Kevorkian developed the Mercytron, a machine that allowed the patient to press a button that released a lethal dose of poisonous potassium chloride and a mixture of painkillers. From 1990 to 1998, Kevorkian stated that he had assisted over 130 patients to their own deaths. In March of 1999, Kevorkian was charged with second-degree murder and served 8 years of his 10 to 25-year sentence. Kevorkian passed away just last year, and although he left behind a very controversial legacy, he undoubtedly paved the way for physician-assisted suicide to be legalized in this country. During Kevorkian's campaign to legalize physician-assisted suicide, a few U.S. states were taking notice. The Oregon Death with Dignity Act allows mentally competent, terminally ill residents to request medication to hasten their own death. Oregon voters approved this law in 1994 and confirmed their support in 1997. The Oregon Death with Dignity Act went into effect in 1998. Since the act was implemented, 596 patients have been put to death by physician-assisted suicide. Since Oregon adopted the act in 1998, 2 other states have made similar amendments. Washington State voted into law their own Death with Dignity Act, and Montana legalized assisted suicide in late 2009. So why is this issue more important than in the past? Well, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the nation's 90 and older population nearly tripled over the past 3 decades, reaching almost 2 million people in 2010. Over the next 4 decades, the population is projected to more than quadruple. That means there will be more elderly patients to take care of, and inevitably more circumstances like Schiavo's. According to CBS News, in 2009, Medicare paid $50 billion just for doctor and hospital bills during the last 2 months of patients' lives. That's more than the budget of the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Education. And it has been estimated that 20 to 30% of these medical expenditures have had no meaningful impact, going to patients whose lives would have ended soon regardless of the treatment. The debate has turned to whether the burden on the patient, family, and economy is worth life at any condition. Regardless of your opinion, physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia are becoming increasingly important issues as more of the nation is becoming elderly and improvements in technology allows us to live longer.